The conference room smelled like stale coffee and broken promises. I sat across from Linda Hartwell, watching her manicured fingers tap against the mahogany table as she delivered the words that would change everything. "We've decided to promote Marcus instead," she said, her voice carrying that practiced corporate sympathy. "You understand, don't you? You're at that age where, well, things change. Pregnancies happen. We need someone more reliable." What Linda didn't know was that in 18 months I'd be sitting in her chair, signing the papers that would make her my former employee. But that morning, all I felt was the sharp sting of discrimination wrapped in a smile. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The meeting had started like any other performance review. I'd walked into the glass-walled conference room on the 15th floor of Morrison Associates Marketing, with my portfolio tucked under my arm, 3 years of stellar performance metrics printed and organized in color-coded tabs. The city sprawled below us through floor-to-ceiling windows, and I remember thinking how small everything looked from up there, how manageable, how conquerable. I was 28, ambitious, and naive enough to believe that hard work alone could crack any ceiling. For 3 years, I'd been the top-performing account manager in our division. My client retention rate was 97%. I'd brought in over $2 million in new business. I'd worked weekends, missed birthday parties, and answered emails at midnight because I thought dedication was a language everyone understood. I thought merit was universal currency. Linda had been my direct supervisor for 2 years, a woman in her mid-40s who wore power suits like armor and spoke in carefully measured sentences that revealed nothing and promised less. She'd climbed the corporate ladder during an era when women had to be twice as sharp and half as visible to succeed. I'd respected her for that. I'd even admired her calculated approach to office politics, the way she navigated boardrooms full of men who still called grown women girls and thought business dinners were appropriate venues for inappropriate comments. But admiration and understanding are different creatures entirely. "Your numbers are impressive," Linda continued, flipping through my portfolio with the detached efficiency of someone reviewing a grocery list. "Truly exceptional work, Sarah. The Henderson account alone exceeded projections by 30%. She paused, and in that pause I felt the weight of a conversation I hadn't seen coming. "Which is why this is so difficult." I leaned forward slightly, confused. "Difficult?" "The senior account manager position. I know you applied. I know you expected." She trailed off, then looked up from the papers with eyes that had learned to deliver bad news without flinching. "We've offered it to Marcus." The words hit like cold water. Marcus Brennan had been hired 6 months after me, with half my experience and 3/4 of my results. He was competent enough, charming in that easy way that some men mistake for charisma, but his client portfolio was smaller, his retention rates lower, his innovative strategies non-existent. He was also 26, single, and spent his lunch breaks talking about weekend golf games and craft beer tastings. "I don't understand," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the confusion churning in my chest. "The metrics clearly show." "It's not about metrics, Sarah." Linda's tone shifted, becoming softer, more maternal, which somehow made it worse. "You're talented. Incredibly talented. But you're also 28 in a relationship and—" She gestured vaguely, as if my entire future was hanging in the air between us. "Things change quickly at your age. Priorities shift. And when they do, it affects everyone." The room went very quiet. Outside, I could hear the distant hum of traffic 15 floors below, the muffled sounds of a city that kept moving while my world stopped spinning. "Are you saying I didn't get the promotion because you think I might get pregnant?" Linda's laugh was short and sharp, the kind of sound people make when they're surprised by their own honesty. "I'm saying we need stability in senior positions. Consistency. Marcus doesn't have the same variables. Variables. As if my reproductive system was a risk assessment spreadsheet. "That's illegal," I said quietly. "What's illegal?" Linda's eyebrows rose in practiced innocence. Promoting the candidate we feel is best suited for long-term success? Nothing illegal about good business sense, Sarah. I stared at her, watching as she reorganized the papers in my portfolio, creating neat stacks that somehow diminished 3 years of excellence into manageable piles of irrelevance. This was the woman I'd modeled myself after, the female executive who'd made it to the upper floors in a male-dominated industry. This was the mentor I'd hoped to become. I've never even mentioned wanting children, I said. You don't have to mention it. Statistics don't lie. Women your age, in stable relationships. She shrugged, as if mathematics had made the decision for her. Look, this isn't personal, it's practical. When Marcus takes the position, he'll be traveling 40% of the time. Client dinners, weekend conferences, late-night strategy sessions. Can you honestly tell me that if you got pregnant tomorrow, you'd be available for all of that? The question hung in the air like smoke. I realized she wasn't asking whether I wanted children or planned to have them. She was asking me to prove a negative, to guarantee something no human being could guarantee. She was asking me to promise that my biology wouldn't inconvenience her profit margins. Other companies manage to promote pregnant women, I said. Other companies can afford the disruption. We're lean here, efficient. We need people who can commit fully. Linda closed my portfolio with a soft thud. I'm not saying you're not capable. I'm saying we can't take the risk. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Risk. There was that word again, as if my potential to create life was equivalent to a gambling addiction or a tendency toward embezzlement. As if the possibility of pregnancy was a character flaw that disqualified me from leadership. I thought about Marcus, who'd called in sick 3 times in the past month because of hangovers. I thought about David Chen, who'd taken 2 weeks off when his father had a minor surgery. I thought about practically every male colleague who'd ever left early for a golf game, a client dinner, or a nebulous family obligation that never required detailed explanation. None of them were variables. None of them were risks. What if I signed something, I heard myself ask, a contract stating that I wouldn't have children for a certain period? Linda's smile was pitying. Sarah, that would be illegal. We can't ask you to sign away your reproductive rights. She paused, letting the contradiction settle. We're just making a business decision based on practical considerations. The meeting ended with a handshake and hollow encouragements about future opportunities, and quote, continuing to prove myself. Linda walked me to the door with the kind of gentle authority used on children and the recently bereaved. I hope you understand, she said. This isn't about your abilities. It's about timing. I walked back to my cubicle on unsteady legs, past colleagues who smiled and nodded, oblivious to the fact that I'd just been informed my uterus was a professional liability. I sat down at my desk, stared at my computer screen, and tried to process what had happened. For 3 years, I'd arrived early and stayed late. I'd volunteered for difficult clients, taken on projects that others avoided, and never once missed a deadline. I'd studied industry trends on weekends, attended networking events on Thursday nights, and read marketing journals like they were novels. I'd done everything right, everything a good employee was supposed to do. And it didn't matter. None of it mattered because I had the biological capacity to become pregnant. And that capacity was apparently more relevant to my career prospects than 3 years of exceptional performance. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the letter I'd drafted 2 weeks earlier, when I was certain the promotion was mine. It was my notice to my landlord, informing him that I'd be able to afford the upgraded apartment I'd been eyeing, the one with the home office and the view of the park. I'd imagined myself working late in that office, strategizing for client presentations, maybe even bringing work home from my new senior position. Instead, I crumpled the letter and dropped it in my trash can. The afternoon crawled by in a haze of routine tasks and forced normalcy. I answered emails, updated client files, and attended a marketing strategy meeting where Marcus was introduced as the new senior account manager. He gave a short speech about exciting challenges ahead and building on the strong foundation that the team had created. I wanted to throw something. During lunch, I called my boyfriend David from the parking garage. "They gave it to Marcus," I said without preamble. "What? Why?" His voice carried the bewildered outrage of someone who'd never experienced workplace discrimination. "Your numbers are twice as good as his. Because I might get pregnant someday." The silence on the other end stretched long enough for me to hear an entire conversation between two people walking past my car. Finally, David spoke. "They said that? Out loud?" Not in those exact words, but yes. I leaned back against my headrest and closed my eyes. "Linda basically told me I'm a reproductive risk. That's insane. That's lawsuit territory. Is it? She never directly said I was denied because of pregnancy. She just said they needed someone more reliable and stable. Someone without my particular variables." I laughed, but it came out bitter. She's too smart to leave fingerprints. That evening, I sat in my apartment with a glass of wine and my laptop, researching employment discrimination laws. The language was frustratingly vague, full of terms like quote-to-quote, proving intent, and quote-quote, demonstrating bias. I read case studies of women who'd fought similar battles, some who'd won settlements after years of legal warfare, others who'd been quietly blacklisted from their industries. The common thread was clear. Fighting back was expensive, time-consuming, and rarely resulted in the outcome the victim actually wanted. Most women who sued for pregnancy discrimination didn't get their jobs back. They got settlements that came with non-disclosure agreements and damaged reputations that followed them from company to company. I could file a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. I could document everything Linda had said, gather witnesses, and build a case that might, possibly, eventually result in some form of justice. But justice, I was learning, wasn't the same thing as getting what you deserved. Over the following weeks, I watched Marcus settle into his new role with the casual confidence of someone who'd never questioned whether he deserved his opportunities. He moved into the corner office that should have been mine, hung his framed MBA on the wall where my certification should have been displayed, and started making decisions about accounts I'd spent years building. Linda treated me with a kind of careful kindness that felt worse than outright hostility. She assigned me interesting projects, praised my work in team meetings, and even recommended me for a professional development conference. It was as if she was trying to prove that she wasn't discriminatory, just practical. As if small compensations could balance the scale of what she'd taken from me. But the most painful part wasn't Linda's condescending kindness or Marcus's unearned confidence. It was the slow realization that I'd been naive to believe merit alone could protect me. I'd thought that excellence was its own armor, that performance metrics were objective shields against bias. I'd believed that if I worked hard enough, smart enough, long enough, I could transcend the limitations others might try to place on me. I'd been wrong. Late one evening, as I was finishing up a client proposal that Marcus would present and take credit for, I found myself staring at my reflection in my computer screen. The woman looking back at me was tired, frustrated, and carrying the weight of a truth I hadn't wanted to accept. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed. The game was rigged, and I'd been playing by rules that only applied to me. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. But first, I had to fall a little further. The resignation letter sat on my desk for 3 days before I found the courage to print it. Not because I was afraid of leaving Morrison and Associates, but because leaving felt like surrender. Every time I looked at that document, with its formal language and professional courtesy, I heard Linda's voice saying that I was proving her right, that women my age were unreliable, that I was just another variable that couldn't handle the pressure. But staying was slowly killing something inside me. The office had become a theater where I played the role of the grateful employee who understood her place. I smiled during meetings where Marcus presented my ideas. I nodded when Linda praised his fresh perspective on strategies I'd developed. I even congratulated him when he landed the Riverside Industries account, using a proposal I'd written but couldn't present because he was now the client-facing senior manager. The worst part wasn't the theft of credit or recognition. It was watching myself disappear. Every morning, I put on my professional armor. The blazers, the careful makeup, the confident stride. and pretended that being passed over hadn't fundamentally altered how I saw myself. But mirrors don't lie, and the woman reflected in the bathroom mirror during my lunch breaks looked increasingly hollow. Not broken exactly, but carved out. Like someone had taken a scoop and removed the part of me that believed effort mattered. David tried to understand, but his solutions always involved fighting back in ways that felt more punitive than productive. "Sue them," he'd say over dinner, stabbing his fork into his salad with unnecessary force. "Document everything. Make them pay." When I explained that lawsuits were expensive and rarely resulted in actual career advancement, he'd get frustrated. "So you're just going to let them win?" That question haunted me because I didn't know what winning looked like anymore. Was staying and fighting a victory, or was it just another form of accepting an unacceptable situation? Was leaving an act of principle, or was it exactly what Linda expected me to do? The answer came during a client dinner I wasn't invited to attend. The Riverside Industries account had been my baby for 18 months. I'd nurtured it from a cold call to a $250,000 contract, building relationships with their marketing team, understanding their brand voice, creating campaigns that consistently exceeded their expectations. But when they requested a face-to-face dinner to discuss expanding our partnership, Marcus was the one who got dressed up and grabbed the company credit card. I stayed late that night, ostensibly to catch up on paperwork, but really because I couldn't bear to go home and pretend I wasn't furious. The office was empty except for the cleaning crew and the occasional security guard making rounds. I sat in my cubicle, surrounded by the client files I'd built, the relationships I'd cultivated, the success stories that had someone else's name attached to them. That's when I saw the email. Marcus had left his computer unlocked, a violation of company policy that would have resulted in a formal reprimand for anyone else. His inbox was open, and at the top was a message from Linda with the subject line, "Riverside Expansion, Confidential." I shouldn't have read it. Professional ethics, legal implications, basic human decency. There were a dozen reasons to walk away. But I'd spent months watching my work attributed to someone else, and curiosity won over conscience. The email was brief and devastating. "Marcus, excellent work on the Riverside presentation. The client specifically mentioned your innovative approach to their brand messaging. I'm recommending you for the regional director position that's opening up in Q3. This kind of strategic thinking is exactly what we need in leadership. Confidential until official announcements, but wanted you to know you're my top candidate. Linda, regional director, the position I'd been working toward for 3 years. The role that would have put me in charge of a team, given me the authority to make real decisions, provided the salary that would have changed my life." Marcus had been at the company for less than 2 years, and he was being fast-tracked to a position that should have required 5 years of experience. And he was getting it based on work I'd done. I screenshotted the email before I fully understood why. Some instinct told me that evidence mattered, even if I didn't yet know what I'd do with it. Then I closed his computer, gathered my things, and walked out of the office for what I decided would be the last time as an employee. The resignation letter I submitted the next morning was professional, gracious, and deliberately vague. I thanked Linda for the opportunities, praised the company culture, and cited pursuing new challenges as my reason for leaving. I gave 2 weeks' notice, offered to help with the transition, and scheduled an exit interview that I planned to navigate with diplomatic precision. Linda seemed genuinely surprised when I handed her the letter. "Sarah, this is unexpected. Is this about the promotion? Because there will be other opportunities." "It's not about the promotion," I said, which was both true and false. It wasn't about the specific position Marcus had received. It was about a system that made my biology more relevant than my performance, that treated my potential as a liability, that required me to prove worthiness that was assumed for others. Then what's this about? Linda's concern seemed genuine, which somehow made it worse. She appeared to actually believe that she'd been fair, that her decision-making process was rational and bias-free. I've decided to pursue other directions. I kept my voice steady, professional. I appreciate everything I've learned here. The 2 weeks that followed were surreal. Colleagues who'd barely noticed me when I was competing for promotions suddenly wanted to take me to lunch. Marcus asked if I'd be willing to brief him on client relationships, as if I hadn't been excluded from those very client meetings for months. Linda assigned me to train my replacement, a recent college graduate named Ashley who had bright eyes and the kind of optimism I remembered having once. The key to success here, I told Ashley during one of our training sessions, is excellence. But excellence isn't enough. You need to understand the politics, the unspoken rules, the ways that perception shapes reality. What kind of unspoken rules? Ashley asked, taking notes with the dedication of someone who believed preparation could prevent disappointment. I hesitated, watching this young woman who looked like I had 3 years earlier. Ambitious, confident, ready to prove herself in a world she assumed would judge her fairly. How do you tell someone that their gender might be the most relevant item on their resume? How do you explain that some ceilings are made of biology rather than policy? Just remember, I said finally, that working twice as hard doesn't guarantee getting half as much. Sometimes it just means you're doing twice the work for the same recognition. Ashley laughed, thinking I was being dramatic. I didn't correct her. My last day at Morrison Associates was a Friday in late October. The office threw a small farewell gathering, cake in the break room, generic well wishes, promises to stay in touch that everyone knew were empty. Marcus gave a speech about my valuable contributions and how much I'd be missed. Linda presented me with a company-branded pen set and a card signed by people who'd never bothered to learn how to spell my last name correctly. I cleaned out my desk methodically, packing client files, performance reviews, and 3 years of careful documentation into cardboard boxes. The items felt lighter than they should have, as if the weight of accumulated disappointment had somehow made physical objects less substantial. But I kept the screenshot of Linda's email. That felt heavier than everything else combined. Walking out of Morrison & Associates for the final time should have felt liberating. Instead, it felt like failure. Not professional failure. I knew my work had been exceptional. Personal failure. The failure to navigate a system that everyone else seemed to understand intuitively. The failure to crack a code that was apparently written in a language I didn't speak. David took me to dinner that night at an expensive restaurant I'd never been able to afford on my account manager's salary. To new beginnings, he said, raising his wine glass with forced enthusiasm. To better opportunities. To unemployment, I replied, and we both laughed, but mine sounded hollow even to me. Over the weekend, I applied for positions at competing firms. My resume was strong, my references were solid, and my portfolio showcased 3 years of measurable success. I should have been an attractive candidate for senior-level positions at agencies that understood the value of proven talent. Instead, I encountered a pattern that became sickeningly familiar. Initial interest, followed by preliminary interviews that went well, followed by final interviews where I met with decision-makers who asked subtle questions about my long-term goals and life plans. Questions that Marcus would never have been asked. Questions that had nothing to do with my ability to manage accounts or develop strategies or lead teams. One interviewer, a man in his 50s who wore his wedding ring like a badge of stability, actually asked if I planned to balance work with family obligations in the near future. When I pointed out that the question was inappropriate, he backpedaled with practiced ease. "Oh, we ask everyone about work-life balance. It's important to us that our employees feel supported." But I knew the difference between genuine concern for employee well-being and fishing for information about reproductive plans. The subtext was always the same. Are you going to cost us money by getting pregnant? After 2 months of rejections disguised as, quote, going with a candidate who's a better cultural fit, I stopped applying for senior positions and started looking at entry-level roles. The market had apparently decided that my 3 years of experience were less valuable than my biological potential for disruption. I was overqualified for junior positions and too risky for senior ones. I existed in a professional purgatory created by assumptions about my age, my relationship status, and my uterus. The savings I'd accumulated for the apartment upgrade dwindled quickly. Unemployment benefits covered basic expenses, but the financial pressure was nothing compared to the psychological weight of forced irrelevance. I'd gone from being a top performer to being unemployable, not because my skills had deteriorated, but because the industry had collectively decided that women like me were poor investments. I started freelancing, taking on small projects that paid a fraction of what my expertise was worth. Writing copy for startup companies, managing social media accounts for local businesses, developing marketing strategies for nonprofits that couldn't afford real agencies. The work was interesting enough, but it felt like a consolation prize. Like settling for table scraps when I'd been dining at the main course. David grew increasingly frustrated with my situation, and by extension, with me. "You're too talented for this," he'd say, watching me work on a logo design for a family-owned restaurant. "You should be running campaigns for Fortune 500 companies." "Should be, and am allowed to, are different things," I'd reply. And we'd fall into the same circular argument about legal action, documentation, and fighting systems that were designed to protect themselves. The relationship began to strain under the weight of my professional disappointment. David had never experienced workplace discrimination, never been passed over because of his biology, never been told that his potential was a liability. His solutions were always direct, always logical, always assuming that justice was available to anyone willing to demand it. But I was learning that justice and fairness existed in different universes, and I was stuck in the one where potential pregnancy was a career death sentence. One evening in February, 7 months after leaving Morrison Associates, I was working on a marketing plan for a small tech startup when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something about the area code made me answer. "Sarah? This is Jennifer Walsh from Meridian Ventures." I nearly dropped the phone. Meridian Ventures was a venture capital firm that had been making headlines for their aggressive investments in female-founded companies. Jennifer Walsh was a legend in the industry, a woman who'd built her own empire after being pushed out of traditional finance for asking too many uncomfortable questions about gender equity. "I've been following your work," Jennifer continued, "and I have a proposition that might interest you. Would you be available for coffee tomorrow?" The meeting changed everything. But that night, I didn't know I was standing at the threshold of a transformation that would make Linda Hartwell's worst fears about ambitious women come true. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.